It is the region's oldest surviving grocer, spanning multiple locations and once covering a multi-state region. A local retailer who secured market dominance against rising national and regional competition through the decades with constant innovation and expansion. Dan's Supermarket with your host Randy Hoffman on History Talk, where we step back through local history to explore the people, places, and events that shaped our community. History Talk streams exclusively Thursdays at 10 a.m. on KFYR+. Despite its possessive name implying ownership, Dan's was not named for a real person. Super Dan the Value Man, sometimes Super Dan Your Value Man, was a super value established marketing mascot used in early advertising. Although being phased out by the 1970s, the mascot continued appearing in the store's in-house bakery packaging until at least the 1990s. Even though the company dates back to 1949, it didn't become Dan's as an official public brand until opening at Arrowhead Plaza in 1953. Some may not be aware that only the Arrowhead location was officially branded Dan's for many years, even as additional locations opened. The other stores were branded with their location: Kirkwood Super Value, Century Super Value, and Gateway Super Value. It wasn't until the 1990s that the stores began sharing the Dan's name on an official basis, even though the corporation itself went by that name, and many in the community collectively referred to all stores as Dan's, or probably more commonly in the day as Super Value. Indeed, the Super Value brand was quite prominent in the stores until being dropped in the 1990s in favor of Supermarket. Dan's Supermarket has its roots back to 1949, when Roy Rockstead and Eugene Bus Leary purchased the former Piggly Wiggly, located at 621 Broadway Avenue, and converted it to Bismarck Super Value. Today, that is the site of Radisson Inn. Bismarck's Piggly Wiggly had opened in 1931, first at 502 East Broadway. Willie Oliver purchased it in 1939 before relocating it. The National Super Value firm had purchased the store, along with Piggly Wiggly stores in Dickinson and Mandan that year, with the intention of reselling them to operators, who would then franchise with Super Value for branding and distribution. The Bismarck store was the first in a new Super Value franchise concept, which Roy Rockstead laughed was too complicated to explain in a September 1985 interview. The former Mandan Piggly Wiggly store was sold to Emily Moose and William Jors, reopening as the longtime Bill's Super Value. Leary retired from the company in 1974, citing health concerns. He sold his stake to Rockstead. While Roy retired in 1985, the Rockstead family continued owning and operating Dan's until selling to Spartan Nash in 2015. Leary later served as Bismarck's mayor from 1978 to 1986. Rockstead and Leary opened a second Super Value location at the newly christened Arrowhead Shopping Plaza in November 1953. Anchoring Bismarck's first shopping center, the new location was called Dan's Super Value to differentiate it from its downtown location, which continued to operate concurrently until 1971. In 1960, the original Dan's at Arrowhead Plaza relocated into an expanded space when the mall itself expanded northward. It was previously located in the space famously housing Ben Franklin. Dan's Super Value at Arrowhead Plaza completed a $500,000 renovation in 1987. That was the last major facelift of that location before its closure on February 21st, 2018. Today, it houses Family Dollar. In 1970, the company opened a south store between Bismarck Civic Center and Kirkwood Plaza, called Kirkwood Super Value. The store held its grand opening in September. It originally spanned 20,000 square feet, slightly larger than its Arrowhead store. Its original Broadway location closed the following year. The store's theme was described as Old England. Different areas of the store boasted unique names. The courtesy counter was called the King's Exchequer. Produce was Village Marketplace. Dairy, Queen's Buttery. The floral department was Sherwood Florist. Its bakery was the Crumpet Shop. The meat department was the Castle Larder, and its snack bar was given the name of King Arthur's Round Table. Upon opening, Kirkwood Super Value featured 7 checkout lanes with full-service bagging. Customers could opt for parcel pickup service, where their groceries were placed in plastic totes to be claimed by plastic number cards upon pickup from their vehicle. This characteristic was practiced by other Dan's locations until the early 2000s. Kirkwood Super Value soon expanded its floor space to 35,000 square feet. Then again almost doubled its floor space with a $685,000 expansion that finished in June 1980. The store's entrance was relocated and a new covered parcel pickup implemented. The expanded store featured 12 aisles, bisected by a center drive aisle. It now boasted 10 checkout lanes, with electronic cash registers and scales, prepped to become Bismarck's first store to utilize UPC barcode scanning later that summer. 6 years after a pack of Wrigley's chewing gum was first scanned by a retail store.
Mini pricing, savings without sacrificing quality and convenience. Mini pricing, convenience and quality. 3 big reasons why there's food for thought at Super Value. Dan's, Bill's, and Kirkwood Super Value.
That location was replaced in 1995 and today houses Verge Fitness and Petco. For a long time, it housed TJ Maxx and Rex TV and Appliance. A north location penned Century Super Value opened in 1975, occupying the northern section of the Kmart building that was formerly home to Kmart Foods, operated by National Tea. Ironically, Dan's founders Rockstead and Leary met as managers of National Tea almost 30 years before. 6 years later, the Kmart location was replaced by a 30,000 square foot freestanding store located adjacent to Gateway Mall in May 1981. Gateway Super Value was expanded to 49,000 square feet in 1989. That location was replaced in 2003 by the present State Street location, south of Menards. The former store today houses Hobby Lobby. On July 4th, 1995, at a cost of $5 million, Dan's opened a new store at 835 South Washington Street, replacing Kirkwood Super Value.
The Kirkwood Super Value store, which after 25 years will close after the new store opens.
It was the first store in Bismarck, second overall after the company's Rapid City store, to officially brand with the Supermarket banner as opposed to Super Value, although its official corporate name was already Dan's Supermarket for many years. It was also the first local location outside of Arrowhead to brand as Dan's, as the company began folding its branding under the shared Dan's name. Despite being dropped from its name, Super Value remained the store's primary distributor. The South Washington store was revolutionary for the market at the time, not only in size but amenities. Spanning 65,000 square feet, it was the first local grocer built specifically to house a banking institution within, although the first bank housed within a local grocer was claimed by then Econo Foods by 1 month, through a remodeling effort to house a Bank Center First branch. The new store also featured a gift shop, coffee shop, and bakery, with a separate entrance for fast and convenient shopping to these amenities. For a short time, it also featured parcel pickup service, much like its Gateway and Kirkwood predecessors. The store remodeled significantly in 2011, which removed the separate entrance. Dan's first purchased land for the Washington Street store back in 1987, 8 years before it opened a store there. The project was originally intended to be a joint venture with Shopko. then owned by Super Value, who dropped out after Dan's failed to commit to a construction date.
I don't think we have even a timetable. Until we're real sure of what like a 60,000 square foot store should look like and what the consumer has a right to expect from that type of store, I don't think we can put a construction schedule to it. We've bought the land, we are going to do something, and we'll determine when that date is based upon when we're comfortable that we've gotten close enough to the consumer to analyze and figure out what they want.
Dan's opted to wait until improvements were made to Washington Street, including completing the Main Avenue underpass. Those improvements were completed in 1993. Walmart's next-door arrival in 1990 triggered a lengthy lawsuit due to a restrictive covenant agreement in place that banned any direct competitor from operating on a neighboring parcel for 20 years. When Walmart proceeded with opening a store, Dan's enforced the non-competitive clause. At first, Dan's was victorious in its lawsuit against Walmart, but the national retail chain won an appeal in 1994, 1 year prior to Dan's opening, that allowed for the sale of limited grocery merchandise. Frictions between the two retailers continued when Dan's attempted to directly link the properties with a permanent driveway. Without a physical barrier separating the properties, drivers soon created their own paths between the stores in an effort to bypass busy Washington Street. An agreement was ultimately made in 1997, where Dan's footed the entire construction bill and fully dropped the covenant restriction in exchange for a permanent connector. Dan's opened its Mandan store in March 1999. Mandan's former Bill's Super Value had sold 2 years earlier and was now affiliated with Nash Finch, today Spartan Nash, operating as Miracle Mart and later as Central Market. In March 2003, Gateway Super Value was replaced by the present-day State Street store. At 61,000 square feet, the new store was 11,000 square feet larger than its predecessor. The State Street Dan's was renovated in 2016. 2013 saw 3 major developments for Dan's. In April, the company announced expansion plans to anchor a new mixed-use development called Sunrise Town Center in Northeast Bismarck. That store opened in January 2015. In November, Dan's sold his 2 Dickinson stores to Spartan Nash, foreshadowing the company's future. Then, in December, Dan's purchased and converted the Bismarck Central Market store. The purchase excluded Central Market's Mandan location, formerly Bill's Super Value, which shuttered soon after and today is the site of Runnings. In April 2015, Spartan Nash, who previously acquired Dan's locations in Dickinson, announced plans to purchase Dan's Supermarket. It ended a nearly 70-year relationship with Super Value. The stores continued operating as Dan's until 2023, when they were folded into the company's Family Fare banner. It may surprise some locals to know just how big Dan's became outside of Bismarck Mandan. At its height, Dan's owned and operated locations across North Dakota, South Dakota, and Wyoming. Rockstead and Leary partnered to own Jim's Super Value in Jamestown, which they continued ownership into at least the 1980s. In 1980, Dan's purchased and converted King's Super Value in Dickinson. A second Dickinson location was added in 1982. Both locations were sold to Nash Finch in 2013, who transitioned them to the Family Fare banner, which the company will eventually do to the Bismarck Mandan stores. Dan's also once previously operated a store in nearby Steele. We've covered a great deal of Dan's rather complex history. Let's review some highlights of monumental events. For more Bismarck Mandan history, check out my 2 Bismarck history books. They are available to purchase on Amazon and select local bookstores. Copies are also available at the Bismarck Public Library. Visit bismarckbook.com for more information. That was our look at Dan's Supermarket. Next, we'll learn about the historic Bismarck Holiday Inn. Is there a local history topic you'd like to be featured? Email suggestions to historytalk@kfyrtv.com.